Hi there and welcome.
You're listening to Animals and Us, Voices of a New Paradigm.
My name is Avantika, and I'm a researcher exploring animal consciousness, environmental sustainability, and planetary health. I want to help bring animal perspectives to the table and transform our relationship with the natural world.
And I'm Barbara. I'm an animal communicator and retired veterinarian. My true passion is exploring the hearts and souls of animals and helping people come to a much deeper understanding of who the animals truly are at their core.
This podcast is for anyone who loves animals and nature and has an interest in their own personal and spiritual development. We'll bring you powerful conversations with fascinating people about animal and nature sentience, consciousness, and communication.
Thank you so much for joining us on this journey of love, respect, understanding, and care for the fellow beings who share our beautiful Mother Earth with us. Hello, and welcome to a new episode of Animals and Us, Voices of a New Paradigm.
We are so excited to be here today with our very special guest, Dr. Linda Bender, who is a veterinarian, an animal advocate, an educator, and author of the book Animal Wisdom, which I've read and absolutely loved. She has traveled the world and spent 14 years living in England, Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, and now lives in the US. Linda's work has included the rescue, rehabilitation, and protection of wildlife, and she's done a ton of work in Asia and Africa on anti-poaching initiatives and many educational programs. Her work has been endorsed by some incredible people like Dr. Jane Goodall and Deepak Chopra. A few years ago, Linda was also invited to Japan to be one of the first signatories of the Fuji Peace Declaration for a peaceful and sustainable world. And we are so honored and so thrilled to have her here today. I've had the pleasure of getting to know Linda over the past year or so, and I'm so fortunate to be able to call her a good friend of mine and a mentor of mine as well. Linda, welcome to our show. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you, and it's my pleasure to join you. Thank you so much for inviting me.
You're so very welcome. And it just so happens that Barbara and Linda go way back and have known each other for many years as they've done some work together in South Africa with the White Lions. So I'll pass it over to you, Barbara. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you and Linda know each other.
I met Linda 11 years ago in South Africa, and we were together taking a week-long workshop with Linda Tucker and Andrew Harvey about sacred activism. And Linda and I actually were roommates at that time. We shared a little hut together and got to know each other, and it was really fun. And I haven't seen Linda in quite a long time. So when Avantika started connecting with Linda and talked about Linda being on the podcast, I was so excited. So this is really fun for me.
Yes, and for me, and what an example of synchronicity. Yes,
Yeah. And I didn't
yeah,
mention that we were with the White Lions at the White Lion Protection Trust at the time, which was
that's
pretty
right.
amazing too. Yeah.
Very, very powerful. I think it leaving there was difficult because the consciousness was and the energy level was so high.
Yes.
I do remember that. Yeah, but we had fun.
Yes, we did. So, Linda, can you talk about what it is that made you want to follow this particular path? Tell us a little bit about your journey.
Well, we could talk a long time about that journey because it's really been my whole life. And to give you a specific example, I came into this world, as some of us do, many of us do, I believe most of us do, with a special connection. And I remember one day my father telling me he was going to take me to a zoo because I was probably 6 or 7 at the time, but I had already just shown such an interest and a love for all the creatures outside where in my yard where we grew up, and I was so excited. And the day came, and my dad was my champion, and we went to this whatever it was. It was a zoo. I grew up in New Jersey, and I remember walking toward this first exhibit. Well, it turned out to be uh, a rather large cage, and I still remember vividly the seeing this cage of black bars, maybe 10 feet by 15 feet. And the closer I got, holding onto my dad's hand, my glee and joy was being transformed into what was in front of me, and that was this amazingly beautiful panther. It was a black panther, and this panther was pacing back and forth, back and forth, back and forth in the most agitated way. And the closer I got, the more I just became part of that being's emotions. I felt the fear, I felt the pain, I felt the anger, and the sadness, overwhelming sadness in this gorgeous being. And in shock, I didn't know what was happening, but I almost became part of this beautiful being. And I screamed. And I just remember screaming to my father, Daddy, Daddy, do something. She needs to be free. She needs to get out of there. Well, my poor dad, what could he do? He was shocked. So we had to leave. I was in tears and could not be calmed down, and we ended up leaving. But I remember that as probably my earliest recollection of feeling this overwhelming desire to do something, and that no animal should be treated that way. And it began the path of my taking that interconnectedness with animals out in whatever way I could. And as a young girl, I was always protecting animals, taking care of them. They always seemed to come to me for, uh, what when they had illness or sickness or broken bones. And it just became my life. And it's led to the journey I've been on. That started it.
That's so beautiful. Linda, it's so nice that, even at a young age, it seems like you were very tuned into what the animals were feeling and thinking and their emotions. And I bet most people that go into zoos don't really have that experience, or maybe don't have someone there to even open up their eyes and their hearts to having that kind of experience. So it's nice that, you also described your dad as your champion, which is really nice because it sounds like he was probably there to support you through these things that you were seeing and feeling and
Yes.
probably working through as a child.
Yes, yes, he did. He was my great advocate, and I was incensed when, the normal paradigm was, well, still is somewhat, but animals don't have feelings. What's wrong with you? Why are you, why are you feeling this? Why are you thinking that? And for me, it wasn't a belief; it was a reality. There was no question. I thought, how could you not know and feel what I have experienced? And that's why I think that it's so important, just to jump forward a bit, for people to have their own personal experiences, you know, in this regard.
That's so interesting, Linda, that at such a young age you were very conscious of the animal's feelings. And I had such a different background where I really didn't get it. I
Mm,
loved animals. I grew up in a family that loved animals. And my father would take us to the zoo or take us to the circus. And I thought it was great seeing these animals. At that time, I had no idea what was really going on. And my question for you is, I didn't become really aware of how I was sensing the animals' feelings until much later. And I don't know that I could have made it through vet school and some of the things I did had I really been in touch with that, been aware of what the animals were going through, because as you know,
We
it's not always pleasant when you're in vet school or those kind or working with any kind of wildlife even. It's not always easy. So how did you somehow integrate that sensitivity and empathy going through vet school and some of the other rescue situations that you've been involved with?
I would say that when our hearts are broken open, in my own case, a lot of the work I've done, I didn't even want to do, but I couldn't do otherwise. And part of my journey as a girl, I was very curious about all sorts of questions because as I look back in retrospect, I see what the animals opened me to was not just them as individuals, but the entire interconnectedness of all life. So that what used to be called, back in the 17th century, animism, where, animal, the root word for animal is anima, it means soul. And it used to be the way it was that all life had soul, all life was conscious and aware. And then we've gotten away from that over the years. And then we entered the materialist view. But I would say it was my entire world. And I think I spent probably the first 20 or 22 years of my life somewhat out of my body because I know it sounds strange, but in a way, I couldn't deal with most things that went on in the world. And because I was so tuned into this other consciousness, I stayed there much of the time. So to bring that full circle, I never even thought people would say to me, "Oh, you have to be a veterinarian, you have to be." It didn't even enter my consciousness that I could or would want to do that until I was in my late 20s. And as life has it and synchronicity has it, you're pulled into, you either do it willingly or you're pushed into it. And I was. And by then, I had studied enough and felt spiritually developed enough that I could handle the difficulties that came with it. And I remember in first year, I had a dread of what I would experience and what would happen, but I thought I could handle it. I remember an anatomy class, which is so awful, and I remember staying up with this, older group and some vets, and we were rescuing this gorgeous white racehorse. And we were up till all hours of the night and we thought it was going to be great. And I went home, slept a few hours, and came back just at the crack of dawn to see the horse standing. And instead of seeing the horse standing, there was the vision I'll never forget was they had already taken off the head and the neck and it was headed to the anatomy lab and the horror of that. And I remember that moment and I said, okay, you either do this, find a way, or don't, or get out, you know. And things happened along the way and I mustered the courage to push through because I had this higher beyond me. In other words, the motivation to do what I was doing was bigger than me. And I was going to serve a cause. I didn't know quite how, but I was going to serve a cause that was beyond myself. And that kept me going. Mm.
Thank you for that. I had a similar experience my first year in vet school where it was before we even started school. It was like the summer before, and I went with a number of
Yeah.
students. I was this little kid on the block, and here are these vet students, and we went to a pig farm. And they were castrating these little baby pigs without any anesthetic or anything, just, you know. And it was horrendous. I was so upset. And I guess I came
Yeah.
to the same kind of conclusion you did, that either I get out of here because I can't stand it, or I keep going.
Yes.
And there was something inside of me
Yeah.
that kept driving me forward, even though I never
Exactly.
really understood it.
Very, very
So
similar.
very
And,
similar.
there were times I
Mhm.
cried and I hated some of the people around me. Yet I had people around me who were wonderful, and kept me going. But, I said, why am I doing this? This is insane, blah, blah. It's not fun. It ain't fun. Um, and yeah. So I totally understand, and I think we're not alone in this, but rather than shutting down, we just get through, just get through it. And we're stronger and better for it.
Hmm. Linda, I have a question for you. If we can sort of almost backtrack a little bit, and I'm wondering if there are listeners out there who are understanding what it means when we're talking about the consciousness of animals, what it means to really have this deep connection with them, and even being able to communicate with them on some level, right? I'm wondering if you can help explain some of that, and how would you describe it to them? So someone who obviously feels connected to nature and to animals, but maybe hasn't heard anyone talk about animal consciousness and what that means, and our ability to tap into that.
Mm, mm. Well, the whole point of animal communication is not that. I see it as a much bigger picture of raising consciousness, right? And so it's not some special woo-woo thing that some people do and some people can't do. It's just when we raise the vibratory energy, we raise our consciousness, and we welcome the consciousness of all life. And that communicating with an animal is just a natural component of that.
I agree with you so much. I know for years, the only term I could find for this was animal communicator, and I never really liked it
I never liked
because
it.
that's such a limited idea, and it's so
That's
much bigger than that.
Yes, it's so, and I think that's really key. And I think that when we open up that discussion, that, well, wait a minute, this is just about raising the consciousness and communicating. And even that communication word bugs me.
Me too.
Yeah. Yeah,
I
I've
feel
always
like what we do, because I think you do the same thing, we're not communicating with animals, we're actually merging with their consciousness
exactly.
and becoming them in a sense, and speaking as them rather than speaking with them.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah. And they don't read books, they don't write, they're not giving us words. We come up. That's our part of it. So I think
That's
that
right.
I think that is a way of bringing in more. The scientists, are more willing to have the discussion of consciousness as opposed to, well,
Communication.
yeah,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Yeah, I agree too. And I think, like, for me, what's important is what they're sharing. It's
uh,
like we can call it animal communication or whatever it is we want, but what's important is what they want to share with us, and
Right.
why that's
right,
so important, and how much impact that can have on our lives.
Right.
Whether you're communicating with, whether you're talking to their human, or in a larger
mm,
context, if you're
yeah,
connecting with wildlife and they have something important to share with humanity, on a bigger level. So it's like, what is it that they want to share with us?
right. Well, in my book, I talk a little bit about species specific genius. So every species experiences the world differently. So we experience our human world through our five senses, and hopefully we can, raise that consciousness, raise that awareness to open to the mystery of life. I mean, therefore, when we open our consciousness, we begin to hear differently, see differently, smell differently. For example, when we go out into nature or take a walk, even in a neighborhood, we can become more conscious of the other beings that exist in the world aside from us. This morning, I was thinking about some of these things, and I was walking my dog, and I thought, if people could just, while they're walking their dog in the morning on the leash, instead of listening to the noise of the cars or the noise of the people, let's put our conscious attention on the birds singing in the trees, or the wind, or the rustle of the trees. All these small things help us open to a whole other awareness of life. And as I said earlier about animism, and now there's an increase in a movement called panpsychism, where let's get away from everything in the known world is dead, and for some odd reason, only humans are conscious. No. If we start with an open mind and say, wait, what else is going on? We don't have to stand on our heads. We don't have to do, 500 meditations or do flips or have a guru. We can just begin to open our minds to what else is going on in the world. And we begin slowly to experience other life forms as alive and conscious and communicating with each other. And then I find that, particularly with the birds and trees, you simply show up with an awareness that, hey, you're alive too. And it's almost as if they welcome you in. And you can begin that slowly, that simply. But I do believe that all is consciousness. I was doing an interview question with Deepak, and he said, well, where do you draw the line of what's conscious and what isn't conscious? I said, I don't draw a line. Consciousness is all of life. So what a picnic to dive in. And I truly believe that the fastest way to open up to animals is really to open up to ourselves and our own beginning of a spiritual path. And we can do that in so many ways, simple ways. Begin to meditate, prayer, walking in nature. So many things that we can do to open. And that communication is natural. It's not supernatural. These things are not paranormal, they're normal. It's just that we've been closed down, and by like exercising a muscle that we haven't, it becomes stronger and stronger and easier and easier.
You have this quote in your book that I love. You wrote, "Animals are the most patient of teachers, and they are overjoyed when we make any attempt at all to perceive their inner life."
Yes,
I love that.
thank you.
Yeah.
Right.
And it can be for, the companion animals that we share our homes and our lives with, or even
Totally.
wildlife, and animals in zoos, like you were talking about the experience you had. So yeah, I'm finding as I'm starting to share with people, what I'm doing, what I'm interested in, everyone's wondering, like, how do you do that? What does that mean to communicate with an animal? Are you talking about
Yeah.
verbally? Like, what does that mean? So it's interesting to even dive into that, how to explain that to someone who may have never heard of it before. Although I find that as I start talking, it seems very intuitive. It's like, it's actually very simple.
It's so simple. And you can even ask people, say, have you ever had the experience of coming home and your dog was sitting at the door waiting for you? Have you ever thought about that?
Mhm.
Or have you ever been in a garden and there's certain flowers just pull you over, and you feel a sense of joy, or simple things? Or have you ever felt that you knew what was going on with your houseplant?
Mhm.
There's simple things, because we are all intuitive. There's,
Mhm.
again, nothing extraordinary about any of this. It is uh, our birthright. We've just been closed down.
Mhm. So Linda, I'm curious to know what it was like in your career as a veterinarian, working with other veterinary professionals who may or may not have been on the same page as you. and had the same beliefs and values or experiences as you. What was it like having this really deeper level of understanding of the animals and your relationship with them while you were doing your veterinary work?
Right. Well, I was trained as a small animal vet, and the only interaction I wanted to have as a veterinarian with a horse was not too close, because I used to ride and I loved horses, but I didn't want to work with large animals. But as the situation had it, my interests were really with wildlife, and my situation um, uh, provided that for me. But I remember I thought, well, maybe I'll be a zoo vet. So because I had a lot of experience with wildlife, and I did go to a zoo. I won't name it, but I did go there, and I had a friend who was working there. And what I quickly realized is that I would never make it as a zoo vet, because the prime concern in zoos are, how are we going to keep our funding? And there are powerful boards and things that people do and people say and ideas they have and the way things are run. And what's going on with the vet, um, for the best interest of the animals, is not number one. And I just saw some things that I thought were just not right. Um, and without going into details, I said I couldn't do this because I didn't have the authority to do what I thought was in my moral makeup to go along with. Um, don't get me wrong; there are some good zoos out there, and a lot of the research that goes on is really good. Like in the Cincinnati Zoo, I was familiar with the program that was started by a woman called Betsy Dresser. And at any rate, it led to one of the first in vitro fertilization programs for Sumatran rhinos. So good things do happen in zoos, but there's just many, if not most, that need to go away. Um, I think there are other ways to educate children uh, on being around animals and understanding animals. But at any rate, I did some small animal practice, but it didn't feel as though it was my calling. And I ended up, just as life has it, combining my three loves: love of animals, my love of a spiritual journey, and love of travel, that I ended up working with wildlife overseas over the years. So I wasn't around, I was a very atypical uh, veterinarian. So in many ways, I was lucky, but that also brought up a lot of horrors too, when I was working with the wildlife, rescuing animals that had been victims of the wildlife trafficking trade. So, you know.
Linda, in reference to Avantika's question about fellow professionals, I've worked with wildlife too, that we have that in common, that we love wildlife. But what I've noticed is that in the wildlife world, the people can be pretty harsh and unconscious. So, how was that for you, working with those kind of people?
Well, horrible, horrible. And again, I keep repeating this, but my own personal spiritual journey kept me going um, often. But it was more the unconscious way that the world's has just been educated into that was the most painful to me. The way people treated animals, the way they thought wildlife, again, was nothing but a commodity. These were the things that were so horrific to me. I tell a story in the book about I was called to rescue some birds that were, it was an um, attempted to get them out on an airplane, to smuggle them out. And I was in Indonesia, and the birds all died, and by the time I saw them, they were gone, and it was one of those moments when I just didn't want to be alive. I crashed. I didn't want to be in a world that was this cruel. Yeah, it was a dark night of the soul for me, and I struggled with it for a long time. So it wasn't just professionals I was working with; it was the whole bang. The whole world I felt was more than I could handle at times. But again, I struggled through.
I read that piece in your book about the hyacinth macaws, and I loved what you said after that. And you quoted Nietzsche, who said, "Whatever doesn't kill me makes me stronger." So, how did that experience and that mindset help you to deal with these tragedies that we do encounter when we work with wildlife?
It's as if it's a training. You don't. I'll speak for myself. I didn't change. Nothing changed about me, but I developed a way, as I still do, and we all must. As a very sensitive person, an empath, I came into this world of extremely sensitive empath. That doesn't go away, it doesn't change. But we do is what I did is find ways to allow things to come into me, but I don't let them come in to destroy me, or they don't become part of me, because when you're sensitive and an empath like that, it can. And I know people who have been devastated and destroyed by the cruelty out in the world. And it's just a huge problem in our group of people. It's a definite huge problem. How do we survive and get better and stronger? But it's really, again, back to our inner strength. It's all about getting back to our inner strength, salvaging that, walking toward our fear, not running away, facing our fears, going forward, and saying, I'm not going to let this destroy me because it's bigger than me. And I think we need to remember that it's not about us, it's about serving a cause greater than self. That's what keeps me going.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And I think right now, especially in the world, we don't have to look very far to see cruel things that are happening out there. And, I have a lot of discussions with people where it's pulling it's pulling people down. It's kind of like you're reaching
Yes.
a point of hopelessness and helplessness and feeling like, well, this is just how things are. But I mean, maybe we can talk a little bit about that, because I know your views are so strong on keeping going and staying true to the work that we feel we came here to do, because
Yes.
it's really easy to get caught up in that. So
Right.
do you have any insight for people who are, not just working with animals, anyone out there who is really feeling the heaviness of what's going on in our world?
Well, I first let me say that if we are not depressed right now, what's wrong with you? Right?
Mhm. Yeah,
Right? If you are a loving, caring person and you're not
yeah.
upset with what's happening in the world, think of it that
Mhm.
way. So, I guess, as we say, in no time in history has there been such awesome problems. Although I think of it, so every generation has their issues. My father was in World War II, and what they call them the greatest generation, and all they struggled and suffered. They went through all sorts of things. We have this sort of mind bending um, issues of climate change, and it's overwhelming. what I, as one person, Linda Bender, what can I do to stop climate change? I'm, again, not stupid enough to think that I can do this on my own, but I can be one little voice. I can be one little blip in the bigger blip, um, and be humbled by it. But it's okay. I mean, we all are feeling this disturbing, overwhelming, tsunami of craziness in the world. And when I hear people in the world of misinformation, when I hear people, passionately talking about things that I know are just from some rabbit hole, it's extraordinarily disturbing to me. Um, but it's that old thing, I fall down. It doesn't matter if I fall down. What matters is that I get back up. And I've also learned that, if I can keep going with this, I've learned that everyone is passionate and everyone wants to be heard, and everyone has a need to communicate. And I find that the more I listen to people who I completely disagree with, or, if they're radical in some particular way, I I shut my mouth and I listen, and I ask 3 appropriate questions that will help bring them out, because only then will they even begin to listen to me. And I think when we turn down the volume of our anger and distrust, and we genuinely open our hearts to listen to people, they know it, they feel it, and it can turn into a productive conversation. Not always, but we have to learn to reach people from a deeper level. And I find that helpful for myself. I remember, I'll give you one quick example. I was on an airplane flying somewhere, and the man who sat next to me was a real materialist scientist, and he was real rigid, and we were questioning each other back and forth, and I knew he was trying to ply me with information that would really piss me off. And I knew it. I'm an intuitive. I knew the game that we were playing here. And then he said, "Well, what do you think about all these restrictions they're putting on our experiments, and these mice have feelings. What do you think about all that?" And I said, "I think it's a shame that we need a group of people to monitor that we can't open our hearts enough to come to our own conclusions." He couldn't say a thing. I didn't fight with him. So, how do we work our way through the world trying to make a difference? Because it isn't just the bigger scheme, it's everybody we run into in the day, and we keep saying it's not just how we treat the animals, but it's how do we treat that poor soul who's, working in the gas station, or dealing with angry people in the checkout line at the supermarket. And I find the simplest things make a huge difference. I ask somebody who's obviously having a rough day, "How are you doing?" And they automatically say, "Well, how are you?" "I'm fine. How's your day going?" It's like a whole gratitude opens. And I think those are important things we need to do every day.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned, Linda, there are 3 questions that get a conversation going. Are they specific questions or just
Specific
in the moment?
questions to that person. And just
Uh-huh.
as important as asking those 3 questions, it's listening, truly listening to what they say.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So, on that note of having conversations with people who may or may not share our views, I was so fascinated when you told me about your son, who is who just graduated with his PhD in quantum mechanics. I was curious to know how those conversations go between both of you. Like, in my world, I feel science and spirituality are very compatible. I feel like they coexist in our world, and I don't see, in my heart and in my mind, there isn't a battle between the two. But sometimes I have had conversations with other people where it's really hard to get past. And when you told me that your son is a has a PhD in quantum mechanics, I was so fascinated to know what his take is on these concepts that we've been talking about.
Well, my son is, as the British would say, is very cheeky, and he loves to tease his mother. And he's a serious scientist, but he's so fun. He's so fun, and he loves to. He's extremely curious, open-minded, and as a scientist, he sees the bigger picture. And we have lots of discussions about, well, I'm his mom, and I'm this spiritual lady, and he loves me and adores me. It doesn't mean we agree on everything, but he is on his own journey of opening. When he was a little boy, he would say things to me, and that's why I knew the court. I understand the journey he's on, but he would say things about, well, I know this or I know that, and he'd have very interesting opinions that seemed way beyond his age group. And he has followed this course in science. He loves physics. He questions everything. We were talking about, what can science really conclude? Why are these scientists, pounding their fists and saying, we know everything, we just need a little more time. We just have this open-ended promise that science will give us the answer to everything. We don't need spirituality. We don't need this. And he laughed and he said, yeah, the only thing that we know and science can know truly is to take all we've learned and use that to form the next intelligent question to move forward. And I think that is what science is all about. And we've discussed, as I say, science is a method of inquiry. It is not a dogma. It is a method of inquiry. It is not a dogma. No one has all the answers. The important thing is to keep our minds open. Keep our minds open, which is one of the first things we said when we started this discussion about, connecting with animals, connecting with nature, keeping our minds open in the field of science. And that's what a lot of our discussions are about. And there are areas of science now that are overlapping with the materialist dogma that we've, had for several hundred years and is still continued, I believe, in our school systems. But that now science can even, we have tons of scientific evidence now on things like meditation, things like near-death experiences. What else? And so many things beyond the scope. So we are beginning to open up. I hope. That's what I hope. And that's a lot about what we talk about. But my son is open to, okay, this is great. And this is a new idea. And we're forming experiments. He works with light. That's what he does. He's a laser guy. And he said, probably the things I'm doing now will improve life maybe in 50 years, medical technology and things. So he's doing great work. But the importance that we all agree on is keeping that mind open.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's important to remember also that like each person is coming from each person is speaking from their own truth and their own life experiences, right? So that's something I've really tried to put into practice over the last few years is, even if I don't see eye to eye with someone, I have to understand and appreciate the fact that they're speaking from their truth and from their experience and from what they've learned. And they can't possibly see things exactly the way I see them because I've had a different life.
That's right.
Don't you think, Linda, that the animals are excellent teachers about this, about how to live together and work together and heal the earth and all of that?
They're the best. They're the gurus. They they truly are. I mean, everything animals have taught me over the years. I trust them. I trust them with their wisdom and their knowledge, and they're just such shining examples of unconditional love, um, on so many levels, humility. And my dogs have always taught me to just laugh at myself when I take myself too seriously. And, things like in my book, I talk about all they taught me about joy, about love, but also about death and dying. And as you know, in veterinary medicine, we see a lot of death. And animals handle that so well, and they taught me so much about that.
What have you learned from the animals about death and dying?
Well, as we know, death is part of life. Nobody gets out of here alive. And it's something that we in our Western culture hide from. Don't talk about death. Don't talk about dying. I remember when I was a little girl and I was learning something about what is all this about death. And I heard my parents talking to each other about Auntie so and so who had apparently had cancer, and they were saying, "Oh my God, we can't tell her. We can't tell her. Oh my God." I mean, we're better than we used to be, but death was this, and I thought, "Oh my God, if this person is dying, why wouldn't they tell?" It wasn't making sense to a child, but it's like a forbidden taboo, and animals don't feel that way, and they helped me learn the beauty of that whole transcendence out of this body to another realm, um, to respect it, to own it, to celebrate the life instead of agonizing over the death, and most importantly, to not try to keep an animal here, because they'll stay longer if they know that we're grieving, and that's part of their unconditional love, to stay for us and to respect their passing. Uh, all species, all species. So many things I've learned.
Yeah. Don't you think a lot of it's because, number one, they're not caught up in the mind chatter.
Yep.
So they're not trying to analyze everything and understand it and then worry about it. But also, they're so living in the present.
Exactly.
They're not concerned about what's going to happen tomorrow or what happened yesterday.
Yeah.
It's all
Yeah.
right here, right now.
That's right. And if right here and right now is okay, whatever happens afterward will be okay too. That trust. I think animals have an incredible trust in the unknown and the uncertain. I sometimes have played this game like, well, when I leave, how is it that my animal really knows I'm going to be back? Do you ever think about that? Without me, she would die. I'm the source of food. I'm the source of water. I'm the source of everything. But I don't see her having this, again, like mind chatter over, whatever. They don't read books. They don't care. They're past it.
Yeah. Speaking of all these amazing things that they can teach us and the wisdom that they have for us to learn from, I really hope that in the coming years, more and more people can become aware of that and start to change how they perceive animals. Because I think currently, very much so, still, there's this perception of what animals are and aren't and what they can and can't do. And I really do hope that that starts shifting over time, because they really do have so much to share with us. But it seems that we compare them to things that we understand, and we measure them by our standards. You have another quote in your book that I love that says, "For humans to come out the winners of a competition in which we
Okay.
have made the rules is hardly surprising." And I love that because it's so true.
Right.
And the moment you start having a conversation with someone about these perceptions, why they think what they think about animals, you start realizing that these beliefs that we've had for years are quite flawed because we're comparing animals to standards that we use for human beings.
That's correct. And I think as far as going back to science again, I think a lot of the material is science. Scientists are one way in the day when they're working in their labs or wherever, and then there's a whole other story when they come home and hang out with their dogs, right? And it's a different reality. Sometimes people experience things. In my experience around people, for example, I spend a lot of time on airplanes, or at least I used to. And I remember this one particular man who sat next to me is a big, strapping man, very masculine, very this rough, tough guy. And we started talking about dogs, and he heard about me and what I do, and we had a little conversation. And all of a sudden, he turned into this whole other side of him opened up, and he became teary. And he was talking about his beloved dog, Charlie, who passed 6 months previously. And he just started shaking and weeping, and he felt safe with me that this was okay and that I wasn't going to ridicule him. And then he became apologetic about it. And I said, please, I wish more people, this is real. This is truth. You love that dog with your whole heart and soul. That's beautiful. And I felt like this huge weight lifted from this man's consciousness. And I think people are more sensitive than they admit. Uh, and that's something we need to champion. We need to champion that emotional side of people and let themselves believe that what they're experiencing with animals is true, because we can talk ourselves out of it, right? I hear that a lot. Well, I know this happened, but it probably wasn't real. Yes, it was real.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And what I've found is that if I have the courage to talk about animals talking to me, that they do communicate, it gives people permission then to
Hmm.
share stories about how they've had these incredible experiences that they've never shared with anybody, maybe because it wasn't acceptable in our society when they've held it for so long. And it's just incredible when they can finally open up and
Yes.
share something.
In my website, I have something called, the unexplained powers of animals, and people are encouraged to write in their personal stories. And I think Rupert Sheldrake and I have one of the only two sites like that. He actually helped me with mine. And people write in with all these stories of personal experiences, anecdotal stories of uh, things that they can't explain that have happened to animals. And the more I get these stories, I have hundreds of stories, and they're all different and they're all unique and they're beautiful, and people feel safe sending them. So I think this is happening all around the world. I think it's more normal than not normal that people have these experiences. But let's start talking more about it. Let's start believing what the animals are teaching us. Let's get out of our own way and cheer this on. But I think in my experience over the years, it's more normal that people because they love to share stories with me, and it's highly unusual when people don't have a story to share. So I think it's happening, and we just need to talk about it more.
That's fabulous that you encourage that
Yeah,
from people. I think it's a big healing process
it's
for a lot of people.
tremendously healing, right?
And also to hear
Yeah,
other people's experiences, like you said, the more we talk about it and people see that others have had these experiences too, this is universal and this is
that's right.
natural. And this is how we all feel when we just allow ourselves to feel those things. I hope that more people can embrace it,
And that's right.
And I hope also, our belief is the more that, well, we hope actually that the more people can tune into this and embrace this, we hope that this will help us shift the human animal relationship that currently exists in the world, and that has led to so many, problems out there that come from, I think, this disconnect.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, do you have any thoughts on that, and how, I would like to think that we can change some of the biggest problems in the world, or help solve them, if we get more in tune with these more sensitive sides of ourselves, and start to listen and turn
Mm-hmm.
inwards, and redefine our relationships with animals and with nature too.
Well, I think that's very, very true, and we have to, as a species, as humans, we have to be really careful of where we're going with our visions and what we collectively see as our future, because that will determine our future, or whether we have a future or not. Because unless things do change, um, we have a very bleak outlook to remaining in this world. Perhaps if we continue this blind disregard for our natural world, this cannot be sustained. I mean, that's step number one. We have to redefine where we're going, who we are, and how we move forward with a future that could be very dark unless we change our thoughts and our actions. And that's why I think it's so important now for everyone to not only just know what's right, but to experience, to have our own personal experiences, and to, you know, get up off the armchair and do good works, do whatever it is that we came in this world to do, in honoring this survival uh, on the planet. And we all have a job to do. We all have a purpose.
Hmm. Yeah, that's what my animals, the animals that I share my life with, that's what they've done for me. They kind of opened me up to that,
Yes.
because I think I was really disconnected before. I kind of was living this really human experience that was very
Mm-hmm.
limited to what was going on in my life and the lives of the people around me. And the moment that I opened up my heart to the animals and saw things from their perspective, and really allowed myself to feel these things I hadn't felt before, I realized how much bigger things were than just me.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And I wanted to ask you as well, can people still send in their stories on your
Oh,
website?
yes. Please do. Yeah. Great stories. They're incredible.
I bet. And it's so nice that you're giving people a place to share those. I think it's therapeutic and healing in itself to just write about something you've experienced like that, and to share it.
Yeah. And the stories are just so poignant. And, I read every one, and they're so emotional and just show so much love, uh,
Hmm.
that, as you were saying, animals taught them. So many of them are about the incredible love bond with their
Hmm.
animals. And they intuitive and psychic connections have shown that it's that bond of love that creates all this, like,
Yeah.
um
And they can help us be present, I think. Above all, that's what they do for me. They help me just stay out of my head. And so I can pay attention to these things. At the beginning of the conversation, you talked about, listening to the birds, and looking at the flowers, and paying attention to these things, that you have to be really present in order to do those things. And I think only good things can come out of more human beings being that way.
yeah, be in the present moment. It's our future. It has to be our future. If the humans left the planet right now, the planet would thrive. If we were here and all of nature was gone, we wouldn't survive more than 5 minutes. So we need to think about, clear thoughts about what we're doing, um, moving forward, and that will change all our decisions. And hopefully, will move us in a better place, in a better direction. And I just want to say that for those of us who are sensitives, what we can't do right now is fall down the rabbit hole of all the craziness. Eckhart Tolle, in a conversation recently, said we got to learn, those of us who are out working in the world and sensitive and trying hard to do the best we can, is stay above the fray, stay above the craziness. It doesn't mean you're not seeing it or you're not denying it, but stay above the fray as best you can. And that involves your own, again, as I started this whole conversation, we need to go inward, find our truth, find our strength, find our visions and our path forward from our heart and our soul.
Mm-hmm.
Stay that course, and then we'll be all right no matter what happens.
That's beautiful, Linda. And thank you. Is there any one thing that you would want to impart to people before we close this conversation?
What I'd like to say is, don't be afraid to speak the voice in your heart, and don't be afraid to make a lot of noise. Do it with love.
Thank you so much. I've so enjoyed this conversation, and what I love so much, Linda, is that all the things we've talked about are things I've thought about for so many years and totally believe and agree with everything you've said, but you've said it in such a beautiful way. You're so articulate that it just lands, and I think that people listening will also resonate with everything you've said, because you've said it so beautifully about the bigger picture, that we're so stuck in this little world that we've created as humans, and there's so much more. And if we can open to that bigger world and have that higher perspective, it makes everything else so much easier.
Right.
So thank you for bringing that
Thank
through.
you. And I want to say thank you for the work you're doing. It's really important, and I champion it, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you so
for inviting
much.
me. Can I add one more thing? I don't know why, but I just feel it's something I want to say, and it's been very helpful to me. But studies have shown that, again, I'm, love science. Studies have shown that gratitude is so important, and feelings of gratitude create happier, healthier people. And there's a particular thing I'd like to share. If you express gratitude to someone who has helped you, for example, a mentor or someone you've just really, really made a difference in your life, and you verbally to that person express that gratitude, your immune system shoots through the roof. So another reason to not get stuck in the fray, to focus on our gratitude, which gives us more strength to do what we want to do in the first place.
Mm-hmm. And it's a really simple place to start. No matter what's going on, no matter how tough the situation may be, or whatever it is we're experiencing that might be pulling us in any which way, I think gratitude is a really great place to start.
So thank you again, Linda, and thank you to all our listeners for joining us on today's episode of Animals and Us, Voices of a New Paradigm. To view the show notes for today's episode, visit animalsanduspodcast.com. You can also find us by that name on Instagram and Facebook.
And be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you can receive new episodes right away when they're released. And if you've enjoyed our show, we'd love it if you could leave us a review on your podcast app. And before we go today, we'd like to share a short blessing for the animals.
We'd like to end this podcast by taking just a moment to be quiet. And we give thanks and blessings to these amazing animals that we share our lives with. They give us so much and ask for so little in return. We hope that you can keep the animals and all living beings in your heart and in your mind as you go about your day. Thank you so much for being here with us today.